Hey guys, welcome back to our another edition of Coaches Roundtable. It's been a couple months. I actually was going to look at this. Do you guys remember when the last one was? Was it like I was going to look at this before we hopped on, but I had
I don't remember if it
that
was this
call.
year or last year.
I believe
It
it was in the winter.
it
I
wasn't.
could pull it
Yeah,
up.
I know it was sometime in the winter, but I think it was like early. But either way, yeah, it's been a little bit, and I mean, shit, we already spent the first like 10, 15 minutes just catching up because we don't get to do this as often anymore. So how's everyone going, Brandon? Since you're on mute, we'll start with you, or if you want to look for that first, I can
Yeah,
look for it while you talk. Just
you look up the podcast and I'll give you guys a little bit of an update on what's going on with me. Let's see. Actually, right now, I'm doing all right. In terms of training, I know we always do like a training and nutrition recap. Training wise, I actually tweaked my shoulder, my right shoulder pretty bad a few weeks ago. I actually was doing renovations at my home and I went to go lift something and I don't know what I did to my right shoulder, but it's been out for a little bit. I've really just been trying to modify things and work around it and really change up my training as a result. And prior to that shoulder tweak, I think the last time we spoke, it was in the winter. So I was already in a building phase because I know that 2 roundtables ago, I had just finished up a mini cut and that was in October. So I know that right after that, all three of us jumped on the line. We did a recap, and then I was already in a building phase, which I'm still in currently. The last time that we spoke, so right now I'm dealing with a shoulder issue. I'm not going to label. I'm going to label it as a tweak, or my UK clients would say like a niggle. Yeah, that's what they always refer to it as, and I rather to phrase it like that instead of an injury because there's a large psychological component to pain science. If you look into it, it's a biopsychosocial model. So I really try to, unless, dude, I'm like down and out, I'm not labeling anything as an injury or if I need like a surgery or a treatment. But prior to that, I had actually titrated my volume up. This was actually something that Jeremiah and I had spoken about on a call, just a private call. I like really pushed my volume up over the last couple months. And the injury, I want to make this clear that yes, titrating volume up can leave you more predisposed to injury, but I literally did this doing manual labor. So it wasn't like exactly related, but I was actually already over 20 working sets for every single muscle group. On my chest, I was up to 30 working sets per week, and delts, I was around the 25 to 28 sets per week range. I was just really trying to experiment with some things, really doing volume ramping, essentially, not like the RP strength model, which would be adding sets every single week, but I was really just trying to see exactly what my cap was essentially or how far I could push things. But since this shoulder tweak or whatever we want to call it, I've had to adjust my training volume and exercise ordering the last few weeks. So now I have my delt and chest volume right around 12 to 14 sets per week. And I also changed out my exercise ordering. So I'm placing movements in different portions of my workout. So usually when I go into a session, I always hit multiple body parts each session, and I prioritize the muscle group that I want to develop the most. So usually I'll put chest first on certain days and delts first on other days. And I've always taken, for the most part, I've always utilized compound movements first in a session. And that's because most of those movements are my key indicating lifts. So that's what I'm looking for performance increases week to week. But since I've been dealing with the shoulder issue, I've been switching my exercise order and doing a lot of isolation movements for my delts and chest first and foremost. And what's interesting is if you think back to all the training programs that we first started on. Like I know for a fact Jeremiah did like Corey Gregory's training system. I did MI40, like Ben Kuholski had a training program like in 2009. That was the first training program I did that was really structured. And we always are advocated that you need to do compound movements first. And then you move on to isolation movements to maximize hypertrophy. But I think with everything, if we think about what's been coming out within the research, there's so much flexibility and so much like hypertrophy is such a forgiving adaptation. If we even look just a few years ago, there was a meta-analysis done on exercise ordering, and they found in terms of muscle that doing multi-joint compound movements first, followed by isolation, single joint movements after, or the opposite order, doing single joint isolation movements, followed by multi-joint compound movements, produce the same increases on hypertrophy, which shows that like hypertrophy truly is such a high forgiving adaptation, and there's a bunch of roads to Rome. So this is just something that I think everyone should be open to. Like right now, they just came out with a pre-printed meta-analysis and meta-regression on rest times, and there's so much flexibility. I think more and more as research comes out, it just shows us that there's so many roads to Rome or so many roads to results essentially. And so, it's nice in this time where I'm dealing with something where I can't really optimize the training or approach training in a method that would be optimal for how I like to approach training. I can still get results. I can still sufficiently stimulate muscle. And so other than that, I'm working around the shoulder injury or shoulder issue. I'm still in the building phase, but I only have approximately like 4 weeks left to this. So what I've decided to do is I haven't done a photo shoot prep or like a hard diet since 2022. And I have a bunch of photographers. So I've been doing modeling for over 10 years at this point. And I have a group of photographers that I used to shoot with every single year. And then that kind of got interrupted during the pandemic. And so I've only shot with them once in the last 4 years, but a lot of them are coming into the Northeast. They've already contacted me. They'll be here. Most of them, it's aligning till July and August. So I'm going to start a fat loss phase the week after my birthday. So that's June 5th. So I'm going to start the next week, a pretty aggressive fat loss phase, try to do a 12-week photo shoot prep, see how lean I can get. And then I have a guys trip scheduled for the first week of June. And it's going to be with a couple guys you guys know. Jeff Black's going to be one of them. So I'm going to go out to Destin, Florida with him and then Scooby, Jason Theobald. So I'm looking forward to that. But other than that, man, business is going well. Everything else is good on my end. And I'm looking forward to hearing like what's going on with you guys.
Real quick, how lean are you trying to get? Because I feel like you keep a pretty lean look year round for the most part.
I already see a Jeremiah.
Dude.
I'll be honest with you. I'm going to get peeled without a doubt. This is now, maybe I should explain this. So for me, I have a certain standard. I've been on stage 15 times. I've been DEXA'd at 4.7% body fat. I'm not saying I'm pushing myself to that degree, but I almost look at physique progression as an expression of my work ethic or an expression of something. It's an art to me. And I really loved competing. It gave me a very clear-cut goal. And I view photo shoots in a very similar regard. And it gives me like a North Star to reach for. So I'm always very consistent with my nutrition, with my training, with my steps, with my supplementation, everything. When I have a very clear goal, I'm just so much more dialed in. I'm sure you guys can relate to that. And so I'm glad that I have like a bunch of photo shoots that are going to be lined up in approximate dates, towards the latter end of August. And I'm going to push myself as hard as possible. It's not going to be like, I'm not going to get into stage condition, but I'll probably get pretty close.
Are you?
I'm stoked to see that because you're pretty. I feel like the last physique update I saw, you were super ripped already. So I'm stoked to see what like 12 weeks of dieting will do. Especially I know because you're not gonna fuck around during that time. It'll be cool to see what you can get done.
And hit on it perfectly. You know my personality. I'm just I'll dial things in, and I don't look at things as a switch. So I'm usually pretty turned on at all times. I'm pretty dialed in, and so I look at this as a dimmer dial, and I'm just gonna turn it up all the way. Dear Lord. And so I'm going to turn it up to 11 essentially. And really, dude, I have all these, I've done over 100 professional photo shoots. I have all these, like a collection of photos. And I really like that kind of like time course where I'm able to look back. I know that Brian Borstein and I really relate to this because I have a very similar thing that he's done, which the last couple of years, he would do a photo shoot like every summer or every fall. And he would compare in the same spots. I used to do that in a different manner. I actually did that 8 years running with the same photographers. I would always shoot with them because it'd be the same camera, same lighting, different locations usually. But I really liked seeing the progression of my physique. And at this point, I'm not going for stage lean. I'm not going to compete for a very long time at this point, but it still gives me something to push towards. And really, that's just also me staying in the trenches. I still prep a lot of high level, whether it be executives or coaches, or I do have a couple guys that are competing at nationals this summer. And so it just allows me to stay tapped in and locked in on pushing my physique in a different manner. And although I'm not really big in the contest prep scene anymore, like that was really the first 5 years of my coaching was very heavily focused on competition prep and physique competitors. That isn't really like the vast majority of my roster now. Honestly, a good percentage of my roster is other coaches. However, I think it's really important that as a coach that we walk the walk and that we are a testament to the practices and the principles that we preach. So I never want to get disassociated from that because I know so many coaches, I've been doing this at this point for 11 years. There's been so many people I've seen fall off, not only from a coaching perspective, but then also from like their own physique perspective. And I'm not saying that you need to be shredded to be a great coach. That I don't want anyone to take this out of context, but I do think that if you're going to tell and show other people and guide them to the best version of themselves, you need to be able to do it for yourself.
No, I agree with that. You definitely need to make sure you can do it yourself for sure. I think that's super valuable there. I'm curious, I'm sure nothing really is going to change. It's been a couple of years since you did your last fat loss phase. Is there anything that you're going to try to implement this time around, or are you just going to try to stay consistent like you have in the past?
Like anything new that you're going to implement?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'll give you guys a little bit of an insight to some things that I'm thinking about. Now, this is not locked in stone because I'm very big into being where my feet are. And this is something that I personally struggle with. So I do want to hit on this first and foremost because and this is with all aspects of my life, I'm very future focused. So I often get 10 steps ahead of myself. And that I do that often with business. I do that often with projects that I have in my mind. And so I used to suffer from that fallacy with fitness, where I'd be always thinking about the next photo shoot or the next prep or the next diet or whatever it may be. And I need to maximize what I'm doing currently. So I do try to not think too heavily into the methodology or the principles or the strategies that I'm going to utilize. But I do want to try a few different things that I haven't done in a few years. So these are going to be things that I've utilized previously. But one will be, now keep in mind that most of my photo shoot preps have been between 12 to 16 weeks. So I do know that is a duration that is a good and appropriate duration for me personally, because Jeremiah, as you alluded to, I generally stay pretty lean. So it's not like I'm trying to get photo shoot ready and I have all this room to go. It's not that case. It's not like most people that come to me that want to get photo shoot lean, that's going to be a 16-week diet at least for them. So I'm in a little bit of a different position first and foremost. But one thing that I found a lot of efficacy to in the past, which I know has fallen out of, I guess, popularity, but it's always worked very well for me. So I'm going to speak on my own personal experiences. On my off days, I'm going to do protein sparing modified fasts. That was something that always worked extremely well for me. It helped me, first of all, it helped me regulate my appetite. So a lot of times you think that you would eat less, but you would be hungrier, but I don't find that sensation. And there's actually some literature in that. Not only do you see less of an increase in hunger on those days, but there is some mechanistic, I guess, underpinnings, which it could be from ketone bodies increasing during those days. Because think about it, you're just hitting your protein needs and getting veggies. So you're essentially hitting two essential micronutrients. You're getting your amino acids, your essential amino acids, and I also will utilize omega-3 fish oil supplementation to hit my omega-3 fatty acids, although those are stored in adipose tissue because they're fat soluble. So I could literally get away with not taking those on those days because I'll have a sufficient intake of EFAs across the week on my training days. However, I am still going to utilize that. And then I'm getting my micronutrient intake, getting different vegetable sources. However, besides that, I'm not going to be taking in any starchy carbohydrates. And that's just going to allow me to create a more effective deficit on those days so I can actually increase my actual or keep my training days a little bit higher and I'm more well fueled on those days. However, another benefit that I just find from a practical perspective is on those days that I'm off from the gym, so that will be generally 2 days per week that I'll be just utilizing a protein sparing modified fast. That has two different benefits. So the first for me from a practical perspective is I'm just really busy with work. So those are going to be the days that I take off from work or I take off from the gym are the days that I have the most calls, the most consultations, and the most client check-ins. So I don't have to worry about eating meals, suffering. Like right now, I'm in a building phase. I'm eating close to 800 grams of carbohydrates on training days. That is a taxing process in and of itself. And you get post-meal somnolence or postprandial somnolence, which is like that sleepy feeling after large meals. So when I'm in this protein sparing modified thing days, that's not going to be an issue. And I know that for a fact because I have more than enough data on myself with that. Another thing is, if you actually look in the literature, this was actually really popular like 2013, 2014, so about a decade ago. There used to be a diet called the 5-2 diet. And there's actually literature on this. I believe it's by Christina Verde, which has done a lot of the intermittent fasting research. But intermittent fasting, a lot of times you hear that terminology and you think, oh, 16-8. Intermittent fasting is actually a broad-based categorization of fasting models. So that can include 16-8, that can include alternate day fasting, and then it all can include the 5-2 diet, which is essentially where you eat at maintenance 5 days per week, and then you're in a very large deficit 2 days per week. And that's essentially what I'm going to mimic. And there is some benefits from a fat loss perspective of that. And it's also going to let me stay more well-fueled on my training days. So this is just something that really works for me. And I'm just going to continue. I understand that the research, a lot of people are heading into the direction where they don't think that over the general guidance or guidelines of protein recommendations of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram equal any other advantageous benefits. But I've seen in my own practices and with clients that utilizing higher protein intakes, especially when getting very lean. Keep in mind, I'm not getting lifestyle lean. I'm going to get shredded. So I do find efficacy from utilizing higher protein diets. I know I've used that with you, Jeremiah. We've had great success within fat loss phases we've done. So that is something I'm still going to do. And actually, this is something I did years ago. And this was actually from a consultation with Alan Aragon. I used to do protein hyperfeeds. So this is something that I literally got from Alan. It was something we discussed. And instead of doing carbohydrate, I would do protein refeed. So I would actually increase the calories. So say I was in a 500 calorie deficit. I'm just going to give you guys a hypothetical that's really easy to do the math on. Instead of increasing back to maintenance and offsetting that 500 calorie deficit by increasing carbohydrates by say 125 grams, I would increase by 125 grams of protein. So I got a really great satiating effect. And I can't say that all of a sudden I saw myself getting leaner, but I will say I had very effective and efficient fat loss phases. So these are just things at this point, guys, like I'm 20 years into training. I've been modeling for over 10 years. I competed 15 times. I also need things that I just enjoy first and foremost, and then also little experimentations that I utilize in terms of different supplementation or different nutrient timing or different strategies and methods just to keep this interesting for me, because that's a huge component of this. A lot of the experimentation I utilize in myself, it's stuff that I want to trial first and foremost, and then I can utilize it on clients, or I could just learn from the experience.
So are you going to do something similar to the 5-2 then, basically then? Is that kind of what you were saying? It would end up being like that where you're closer to maintenance 5 days a week and then a larger deficit? Is that?
Yeah, so essentially what I'll do, that's just an example of what's actually in the literature. I will do a very large deficit on, and this is just my, realize I'm 4 weeks out for this. So I haven't really drawn this up for myself, and I really will go into more detail, and I can even come on the show and give you guys an updated viewpoint on exactly what I'm doing. But this is just my conceptual thoughts this far out. I will create a larger deficit on those non-training days and just
Gotcha.
utilize protein and veggie meals. And so that will allow me to create a very large deficit. I've went as far as doing, and keep in mind when I throw out numbers, this is for me, my body, and what I need to do during a prep. Generally, when I would get very lean now this is for competition, so this is a little bit different of a beast, but I would have to average across a week 1,800 calories. But there was times within the diets that I did for contest prep that I would do 1,200 calorie days. Now, mind you, when I'm lean, I'm 200 pounds. So at 200 pounds, I would do 1,200 calorie days of a protein sparing modified fast. And I would essentially do 2,200 calorie days on my training days. So it would be an undulation that was quite drastic, but it's only 2 days per week. And second of all, like I said about the benefits from just a practical perspective, it allowed me to just stay locked in and really dialed in at work. And I actually find that to be hugely beneficial. I don't want to be worrying about meals, especially on those days where I'm already stressed and I'm the type of person. Now, keep in mind that this is me, but also when we look into the literature on stress's impacts on appetite, we see about 60% of individuals, 50 to 60% of individuals actually eat as a compensatory behavior towards stress. So they stress eat, they look at food as a coping mechanism, but about 30 to 40% of individuals actually see a reduction in appetite. And I actually fall upon that latter end of the spectrum. Whereas when I was younger and when I was in college, I looked at food as a coping mechanism and I really needed to improve my relationship with food, which I did a lot of internal work on. So I no longer look at food as even an option when I'm stressed. That's a temporary self-medication strategy that I don't find efficacious for my goals or for my health. Because I've went down that route where, yes, I would overeat when I was really stressed. And all that did was prolong and offset the stressor that I was dealing with. And it was still there when I got done eating. And then I just felt like shit about myself. So I realized that there was different stress mitigation techniques that I needed to utilize. And I would rather, if I'm stressed, I'm going to first focus on what is stressing me, try to go after the root of the problem and really try to mitigate and manage that. And I'm just going to keep working on the task and take things one at a time rather than turning to food. So I actually find that I can go longer without eating when I'm stressed because I'm so dialed in on what I'm doing, because usually it's a deadline that I have or it's an issue with a client or whatever it may be. I'm stressed about that. Prolonging that or putting that off to go eat or to like stuff my face never has resolved the issue that I'm dealing with.
Yeah, I feel like with food, I can totally relate to that because it's like before the call I had before this, and then our episode, it's like, man, I got to hurry up and eat so then I can train, after this, and you got to time it. So it's like, it can be nice to not have to worry about that all the time. But the reason I asked about the 5-2, I could see how that could be like helpful from a lean body. Like I could see how it could really be helpful from a lean body mass retention perspective, because I feel like you're spending a good amount of time closer to maintenance. And then you have a couple of days there where you're lower calorie, but protein's still high. So I feel like that could be a good, again, if you can do that. And like you said, you have the experience, it works for you, and you don't see like large hunger spikes the following days or anything like that. I feel like that could be something from a lean body mass perspective that could be helpful there.
Yeah, there was actually, so I utilized this strategy with a lot of clients early on. About 2015, 2016, there was a study in 2014 that came out. I believe it's by Davudi et al. It's been a very long time since I looked at it, but it's essentially a calorie shifting diet. And they would do 11 days in a large deficit and then 3 days of refeeding. And they found that to not only maintain lean body mass better, but also I believe metabolic rate. And actually, if we look, there's a recent meta-analysis that was done on diet breaks. So this is just intermittent dieting strategies, bringing yourself back up to maintenance. But they saw that those that utilize intermittent dieting strategies, so that was categorized as either diet breaks, so anywhere between 1 to 2 weeks worth of just going back to maintenance, was able to preserve resting metabolic rate more effectively than continuous caloric restriction. It was a very small change. It was about a 50 calorie difference, but it's still something. So I'm not doing it for those exact benefits. This aligns more with my psychology, but I also do believe that there's some potential. Now, keep in mind, I'm putting potential physiological benefits. And I just know that this aligns well with my own preferences and predispositions. And also, it's something I have so much data on. It's not something that I would utilize with all clients. There's always, Jeremiah, I've dieted multiple times and I haven't utilized this approach with you. However, there's a strategy and an approach, a right time and a right place, depending on the clientele.
Yeah, it works for you. And that's really the biggest thing there is it's what works for you. And you wouldn't try to do this to somebody that they're not going to be able to stick to this, even if it could potentially be better from a physiological standpoint. So yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense there with that. Also, real quick on the podcast, it was actually the end of January, I believe. So like we thought in the winter there, it seems like we end up doing these like on a quarterly time frame now at this point. Cool. But yeah, Jeremiah, what about you, man? So now we know the timeline here, end of January, anything been going on here, and I'll leave it up to you.
To speak to those diet strategies first, that's interesting. I feel like like that time frame, like 2015, 2016-ish, like things like that were a lot more popular. I feel like, at least for me personally, I was like absorbing a ton of Lyle McDonald stuff then. And I feel like he had a lot of like really interesting methodology. Like he was the protein sparing modified fast, like guy originally. Isn't that right?
So initially, I learned about protein sparing modified fast from George Blackburn, I believe was the actual researcher
Oh,
that
word.
looked
Okay.
into it. It's from the 70s, but I do know, and no, you are correct. I think Lyle popularized it because he had something called the rapid fat loss solution, or he had the
Yeah.
stubborn fat loss solution and the rapid fat loss protocol, which actually a very long time ago, I actually ran his rapid fat loss protocol. So I am familiar. It was like a 2 week just crash diet. And now I wouldn't be able to, first of all, I didn't find that to be very effective for myself, nor would I be able to really endorse that at this point, knowing like the state of literature and just working with, and Jeremiah, you could relate to this, working with so many women, I would never put that out. But what I'm doing, that's why I always put the caveats like, this is just like a personal thing that I'm doing. I'm not like crash dieting myself. It's 2 days per week. I'm just doing protein and veggies. I'm still getting sufficient essential nutrients or essential nutrients and micronutrients. That diet was very rough. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I think all the rapid fat loss strategies are very cool, super interesting as well. But I think that a lot of times the individual who's drawn to something like a protein sparing modified fast, a lot of times it's one of the worst things you could do for them. Hypothetically, if there's 5 people who DM you after they listen to this podcast and are like, Brandon, tell me how to do a protein sparing modified fast. A lot of times it's, hey, you're actually not, this is not a great route for us
You're
to
not a
take.
candidate. And that is when I'm over to both of you guys, because I've done mini cut podcasts with both of you guys, and I've went over the candidates or the vast majority of people that aren't a candidate even for mini cuts, let alone a rapid fat loss phase, which would be even a more aggressive rate of loss. But the protein sparing modified fast, how I'll be doing it, I'll still be aiming for about a 1% rate of loss per week. I will just be undulating the calorie intake on different days to accomplish that. Whereas the rapid fat loss phase, honestly, like a mini cut, we would generally say between say 0.75 to 1.25% per week, even maybe up to 1.5% per week. I know that back in the day, if you look on forums or you even speak with people that were around and doing a rapid fat loss phase, I'll tell you during my rapid fat loss phase, I was losing around 2% per week.
Yeah, that's pretty
Or
close,
yes,
for
2%
sure.
per week.
That sounds awful.
But yeah, no, it's just reminded me of that. I feel like I used to like try to use strategies like that a lot more with varying success. But I heard Brian or not, I heard Lyle on Brian and Aaron's podcast a while back, and I really enjoyed his episodes actually there. And it kind of reminded me of Lyle and a lot of and I was getting me wanting to dig back into his stuff. But yeah, anyways, man, last time we talked was in January. Let's see, since then, went on my honeymoon. So Brandon and I did a quick fat loss phase for that. Really happy with how that went. Definitely gained more on the honeymoon than I expected I would. Brandon and I talked about that a lot. That was a situation. I think that's the first time that I haven't tracked on a trip in a very long time. What me and my wife were in Egypt. And it was really interesting to see how just being in a different culture where I think there are a lot of instances where it's like I didn't have the right food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's the first time I've been in a place where I like genuinely couldn't go to the grocery store, or we were like on resorts and it was like really not extremely safe to go off. But there were still like very solid food options. Like they would go make you an omelet. Like you don't know how much oil they put on that omelet. Or there's Greek yogurt there. But hey, this is definitely like the full fat Greek yogurt versus the 0 fat Greek yogurt that I expected. We still came back in a good place, but it was like the first time where I've been like in a very long time where after a trip I've been like, damn, I was a little bit heavier than I expected coming back from that. But it was also a thing where it was like, man, it's my honeymoon. I'm gonna be present, enjoy it. I'm not too worried about it. And I know Brandon and I talked about that as well, but it was an incredible time. That was a really interesting experience though, with again, like I feel like anywhere else I've been, you'd have such a good concept of what's in the food that you can very much predict. First, it's like I still typically track on those. And again, we took just the entire time off from it, but it was really like an interesting like learning experience for me as well. And I feel like it's like relatable for clients as well. If you're not like as well versed in the tracking side of things, how easily that can happen. But yeah, no, it was, so that was interesting to see. But since then, really just we kept calories pretty low since then. I know I was complaining a lot to Brandon about how hungry I was, but actually still really happy with how the physique progression has been, and just focusing on adding tissue since then. And then, so yeah, I'm happy with how things have gone there. I don't feel like it's much different than like our approach than last time we talked about it. It's been pretty similar over the last couple months. Business side of things are going well. I don't know if we'd added Tass to our team since last time we talked. We've added 2 new coaches to the team this year. So Tass, who's been incredible, and also Chelsea, who is a client of Brandon's as well. And Brandon gave me a great review on her, and both of them have just been incredible. Just such great coaches. It's so cool, just like the level that they're coaching at already, just coming onto the team. And it's cool to have people again like Chelsea, who has already like mentored under Brandon and learned from him for so long, and like be able to have someone that I trust so much give me good insight. And so I've been thrilled with how that's going. But yeah, I know I talked to you guys about the house stuff off air, but yeah, keeping busy, and that's basically it from my end.
So with your calories, they're just lower than what you'd want them to be in like this phase, or just in general they're low?
I feel like I was coming from a place where it was like I'm living good. Like we were eating like 4,000 calories a day. I liked how our setup was with I had the 2 lower days per week as well on my rest days. Similar to what you mentioned, Brandon. I very much aligned those with my busiest days of work to where it was nice, where I don't have to eat much. But then no, since coming back, we just had them low. Part of that was again, hey, let's tighten things up post after I came back fluffier than I expected to after the honeymoon. I feel like we saw a nice little recomp. Would you agree with that?
100%. So really, we have to realize that every phase is different, and both our energy expenditure, the amount of muscle mass we have, there's so many different factors and variables that need to be taken into consideration. And what worked in one building phase, whether that be training wise or calorie intake or macronutrient composition, will not work automatically in the other phase. So when Jeremiah came back, as he alluded to, he came back quite heavier than we expected, to say the least. And so I wanted to reel things in terms of just decreasing inflammation, getting his body composition back in a good place. And then really, when I make adjustments, it's based on the necessity. There needs to be a demand there. And what's been really interesting within this phase, and actually I spoke with him a little bit about this, and this is diving into mechanisms and things, but what I noticed within the last few months of his building phase, in this building phase as compared to previous building phase, is the calorie intake that has been needed to facilitate both very good training performance. I have not seen someone progress in training at this advance of a stage in quite some time. Jeremiah's training has been off the hook, hitting PRs very frequently. It's been amazing to see, and it's been super cool to watch the videos of and be a part of. So that first thing is his training performance is linearly going up in terms of hitting personal bests, of getting progression on a week-to-week basis, he's very diligent in terms of his proximity to failure, being very accurate in terms of his execution. Everything has been on point in a good place. And then also his rate of gain has been slow and steady. However, we're back to where we were at the peak of his last mass, eating less calories. So what I've really came to think about, and this was a discussion him and I had in one of his check-ins just a few weeks ago, when you actually look energetically at the net metabolizable energy that it takes to build a pound of lean mass, we're not talking about 3,500 calories. A lot of people think about 3,500 calories equals a pound up or down. That is a really rough estimation of a pound of mixed tissue. For an actual metabolizable, a pound of metabolizable lean body mass. Now, keep in mind, that's only about 20 to 25% actual protein content. So we have to think about the fact that muscle is mostly water, 75% water. If you actually look at the energy density, which comes out of a paper from Slater et al. 2019, it is 825 calories. So if you were putting on just exclusively lean mass, you would need a net surplus of 825 calories. Now we know that is, you wouldn't just increase your intake over a month or over a week by 825 calories and net that, because there are compensatory mechanisms. So when you're training, you're increasing your exercise activity thermogenesis. When you're essentially, the process of stimulating muscle protein synthesis is very energy demanding in and of itself. But we can't say that you need a 3,500 calorie surplus to equal a pound of actual lean body mass, because that just mathematically is not correct. A lot of times in the fitness industry, we simplify things, but they're actually incorrect. So what I'm seeing with Jeremiah is that it's taken a smaller surplus to actually elicit lean mass gains, because his physique is in a great place. If I actually look at comparatively, which I do on a weekly basis, where he was at the same body weight in the last time we were in a building phase. Now, keep in mind, we went through a mini cut and we cleaned things up. His body composition is in a better place right now at the same body weight. His training performance is at a much better place right now than it was at that same body weight previously. But his calorie intake is far lower. Now, do I just increase? And think about this from a coaching perspective, guys out there. Would you rather that I just increase? And I know, Jeremiah, this isn't your thought process, but would you rather a coach just increase your calorie intake back to where you were and potentially put you in a more disadvantageous perspective from a body composition perspective, where you're going to gain more fat mass than lean mass? Or would we keep riding it out? So really what I've done is just make calorie increase based off the needs and demands. And really what I'm seeing within his biofeedback, rather than going back to a model that I know worked previously, but may just accelerate his rate of fat gain as compared to lean mass gain, because he is a very advanced trainee. There's a ceiling to how much muscle we can accrue in one specific period of time. And oftentimes when we look at large surpluses, we go back to Garth, like 2013 study. They looked at a nutritional counseling group that was approximately eating 500 to 600 calories into a surplus, and then a ad libitum group that ate to fullness. And in the ad libitum group, they were probably in the 200 to 300 calorie surplus. And they found that both groups gained about the same amount of lean mass, but the nutritional counseling group that was in the large surplus, they were counseled to gain at a faster rate. They gained at a rate of 0.4% of body weight per week, as compared to the ad libitum group that gained at a percentage of 0.2% of body weight per week. We actually found that they gained about the same amount of lean mass. However, the nutritional counseling group that gained at double the rate actually gained 5 times more fat mass across the course of 10 weeks. So really, when it comes down to it, I really want clients to eat enough of a surplus to fuel their training, to be sufficiently fueled, to make sure that their training performance is linearly going up, and to make sure we have enough recovery resources to meet the energy demands of their training, of their lifestyle. But I don't want so much that it's going towards excess fat mass and accrual. So really, this has been like a balancing act. And yeah, it is nice, of course, to eat more food, but also I think with how your performance has looked, how your body composition has looked, it's been extremely successful.
Yeah, it's been interesting. When we were in Egypt, I know like through all our check-ins for a very long time until the last couple months, when it was like, what's the thing to do better this week? Almost always it was like something related to sleep for like the longest time. And it was really interesting in Egypt. I love caffeine. I know Brandon, you and I have that in common, where I think we both love stimulants. Jeff, I don't know where you're at with that, but I think you and
I
I have.
got a little bit of coffee right here. It's 2:43 in the
Dear
afternoon.
Lord.
So
I think like Brandon, since I started working together, it's been like a gradually like improving that more and more, where even up until a couple months ago, my sleep was tremendously better than it was 2 years ago. But and for the longest time I was having like 700, 800 I remember when I was in the gym, like working in person, it was like, dude, I was having like 1200 milligrams of caffeine a day. But it was really interesting there. I like gradually been pulling that back more. And in Egypt, it was like there just wasn't like any caffeine available hardly, except for like just shitty Red Bull, like not even the zero, not even like the sugar-free, like 0 calorie, 10
the
calorie
old
Red Bulls,
school
but
Red Bull.
yes. And so it was literally just I drank so much less caffeine than I normally did. And I got in such a good sleep routine where it was like I'd fall asleep at 8, 8:30 every night. And we'd wake up like between 4 and 5 every day. But it was really interesting for me to see, even when I had to cut it back to, because I had done a good job like cutting back to 300, 400 milligrams a day before that. But when I stopped having that like somewhere between 10 a.m. and noon serving of it, and just like keeping it to like first thing in the morning, still like how much better my energy was throughout the day, how much better my sleep was. Since then, I've for the most part just been cutting it off. Like I don't drink any caffeine after like when I first wake up. So sometime between 4:30 and 5:30 in the morning, just not drinking anything after that. And then if I'm training later, use a pre-workout. And I've been sleeping like I've never slept like this and like in my adult life that I can remember. And it's like super obvious, but it is funny how much I didn't feel like my sleep was necessarily bad before. Again, there would be nights, but it'd be like, oh, I was just stressed or I just had this or whatever. And that's why it was off. But it is interesting to see how even that, and I had 100 milligrams of caffeine at noon. It's interesting how much still that impacts that. And then I woke up like 4 times that night versus I slept my ass off that night. It's been a really interesting thing to see. And I can definitely tell that from before I went on my honeymoon to after, that's the one variable that I think has changed, right? And I can for sure tell of course it's obvious, but again, I didn't feel like it was bad before, but it's been interesting still to really see how much of a difference it's made in my recovery. And I hate to say it because I still just like love caffeine, but it is interesting to see how much better I feel like my like mental performance is throughout the day as well. Like that, like you don't have that. And again, I didn't feel like I was doing a crazy amount by that point, but like 2, 3 p.m. still like I rolls around, I feel so much better versus I don't know. It's been an interesting thing.
It was really funny because in one of your most recent check-ins, you mentioned that you haven't been intaking caffeine past like 6 a.m., I believe you said in the check-in itself. And this is actually a philosophy or approach that I've used for quite some time because you guys both know that I'm in bed and out by 8 o'clock at the
Yeah.
latest. I'm up at
Yeah.
3 a.m. every morning. And
Yeah.
so I only will take caffeine as late as my workout. And generally the latest that I go into the gym at 6 a.m. So I've always done that. But there was actually a recent review that came out last year by, I believe, Gardner et al. And they looked at, it was a meta-analysis and systematic review that looked at the effects of caffeine intake. Now, if we look, and now mind you guys, I came from the supplement industry. I used to do work in formulation.
Right.
I spent 10 years in the supplement industry. We always used to hear, or even like the early studies from the 80s found that the caffeine half-life was between 5 and 9 hours, depending on your CYP1A metabolism, meaning how, if you were a fast caffeine excreter or fast caffeine metabolizer or slow caffeine metabolizer. But this recent study broke down like all the literature on caffeine and its effects specifically on sleep. And they actually found that a cup of coffee around 100 milligrams was in your system for up to 9 hours. So it would disrupt sleep if taken within 9 hours of sleep. So, for instance, if you took a cup of coffee at 12, or say more realistic, because people don't go to bed as early as me. So, say that you go to bed at 11 p.m. every night, but you take a cup of coffee at 2 p.m., that is the cutoff in which you will not see impairments in your sleep. If you were to go to 3 p.m., it will impair sleep quality in terms of sleep latency, which means how long it takes you to get to sleep, and then also sleep quality. They also did one on pre-workouts, and I forget the actual milligram count, but it was a bolus dose. So keep in mind the average pre-workout in the market's about 350 milligrams, and they found that it was about 13 hours removed. So if you're someone that's going to bed at 11 p.m., you need to take your pre-workout at least by 10 a.m. or earlier, or it will have negative impacts on sleep. So it's so much longer than we think about in terms of its actual effects on sleep. A lot of times we only think about it from the perspective of how do I feel this in my system? But there's so much going on from the pharmacology to pharmacodynamics of an actual drug, which caffeine is the most readily used drug in the world. So I stumbled on that because years ago I realized that if I had caffeine a little bit later in the early morning, essentially, so say 10 or 11 a.m. in the morning, I was trying to go to bed at 7 or 8 o'clock p.m. and I was still having impairments in my sleep. And I just stumbled upon that naturally. But it was so funny reading that systematic review and meta-analysis last year where it was like, this is just like reinforcing what I've seen in practice or seen with myself at least. And it's drastic the impacts that it can have. And that's really where turning to, so say for instance, Jeremiah, you're using a non-stimulant pre-workout. I'm sure that there's some nootropic ingredients. And I know
Mhm.
that when I was in the supplement industry, I actually formulated a couple non-stimulant products, which were pump products, but really the main ingredients in there were nootropics. So there were
Yeah.
non-stimulant agents that helped with focus and cognition. And then also things like alpha GPC, which can help with actually contractile force and really help with like the mind to muscle connection. And you don't have to be relying on caffeine. I think a lot of us get into this pattern where it's like we're more dependent on a substance essentially, like especially caffeine. Like everyone, they wake up for their coffee. And I completely relate to that. And I still take caffeine upon waking. So I'm right there with all you guys. I just make sure that it's very far removed. So in my case, I don't drink caffeine within, say, 14 hours of going to bed. So really, I'm not saying I'm not affected by any of this, but I'm usually outside of that window where it's really not impacting my sleep. Whereas if I was to take caffeine later in the day, I know for a fact that it would impair my sleep. And it's something that a lot of people, they're in this kind of like vicious loop where they're over caffeinated. And so they get poor sleep that night. And then the next day they're super tired because they got really poor sleep that they're like, oh, I need caffeine. So they do it again and again. It's like this vicious cycle where they never get off. Whereas that's where I've actually utilized this with certain clients that are really bad. Jeremiah, you weren't at this point. Like you had pretty good sleep quality. It could just get a little bit better, which you did.
Yeah.
But there's some people that it's like they're tired and wired. They're suffering with adrenal issues. I see this on their blood work and on the lab panels that I pull. And it's like, all right, we have to do almost like a caffeine or a stimulant detox or really pull things back. And that's where I'm utilizing either adaptogens to help with lowering their cortisol secretion, or I'm utilizing things like Rhodiola rosea, which is great for stress reduction, but it also helps with focus and energy without the stimulant aspect of things.
And that's all. I was part of that too. I started the new year with it was literally just 3 days with no caffeine. And it was shocking to me how hard and what a big deal that was for me. So, wow, this might be something that I need to address a little bit more. So, yeah, no, it has been really interesting to see. And that is, I agree. I think people underestimate how long it impacts you. So many clients who I have, it's like, I stopped drinking caffeine by 2. But even when you're mentioning that, like the cup of coffee, what do you say they found the
It was,
like 9 hours?
we can round it to 9. It was 8.9 hours, I believe.
But the thing with that too is a cup of coffee is like 100 to 150 milligrams of caffeine. Whereas like your energy drinks and things like that, they're commonly going to be 200 to 300 milligrams. Pre-workouts very often more than that. But I don't blame anyone for absolutely loving it. But it's been an interesting thing. I think it has been like the one thing like noticing definitely like by 7 p.m. I'm a lot more tired, and it's been like just working on accepting that's normal to feel that way rather than I feel like I like need to like be like I need to be on like okay now I need to hang out with my wife and I need to be like on and awake and alert and like for this and then I should just be able to just flip a switch and go to sleep and just realizing I don't think that's actually how it works for anyone and that's just a normal human thing, but just accepting that. But no, it's been very helpful, I think. Jeff, what's been going on with you, dude?
Real quick on the caffeine thing, I feel like caffeine, I feel like it's almost touted there is no downsides to it. And there definitely is, like you said, and then even too much as well, too, like even from an anxiety standpoint, like I know for myself, like I know days that maybe I have a little bit more, like later in the night, I'm like, dude, why am I like so stressed about it? And I think I'm like, man, I had a little bit more caffeine today. And I think that that's another like underrated thing that people don't really think about from a caffeine standpoint. Yes, today's one of those days where I'm having caffeine a little bit later than I should. I haven't, in my defense, though, I haven't had any since we started chatting. I have my stem-free pre-workout right here. So that's what I'm taking right now. But there are some days where if I have a podcast or something, I will do it later than I should. And I definitely feel it later at night. Like you said, that half-life aspect of it, I think super important there. But as far as me, man, so since we talked last, man, there's been so much, I feel like. So actually, last time we talked, I think I found out like maybe a couple days before that we were having a baby. I just couldn't say anything yet. So I had to keep that on the down low. It was really hard not to say anything to you guys, but I was like, I got to wait till you got to wait you got to wait a little bit. So we're having a baby. Like I told you guys off air, we were wanting to wait a little bit. Hey, it is what it is. Stuff happens. It will be interesting to see. For me, it will be a nice little challenge to see how I manage training. I feel like from a content standpoint, it will help me maybe, put some stuff out there in terms of things that I'll try, rely on some of the things that I've learned learned over the years of, okay, you can dial back your training if you need to, frequency, your volume, and you'll be fine with that. So it'll be cool to implement that. It also would be good to relate to some parents and things like that too, that with clients that I work with too, because it definitely adds another layer of complexity to things when you don't have to worry about taking care of another human, right? I think that will be cool from that standpoint. Not looking forward to the sleep selfishly, but just going to be something that I'll have to work through there with that. So I'll be jealous of you guys getting your nice sleep during that period of time. And then we also are going to be closing on our house here soon. So we're going to be moving into a new house here in the next couple of weeks. So next time you guys see me, I'll have a different background. So looking forward to that. So a lot going on right now from that standpoint. I did the N1 biomechanics practical. Jeremiah, I know you went to that. I think like sometime late in 2023, I think it was. Dude, that was really awesome. Honestly, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a cool kind of event, like the hands-on practical side of things. Cause like I had thought about it. I never had done really, other than when I first started training. And that was not like the style of training that I enjoyed was like your personal trainer certification and like you work for a company and they like tell you how to do things, right? It was like, that was the only hands-on experience I had from like a execution standpoint and whatnot. And so I thought that was really cool. I learned a lot and there was a lot of information in 4 days. Actually, the last day, it's leg day, right? You do the hack squat or whatever. I slept on my neck weird. And sometimes when I sleep on my neck, I get this like weird kind of just once I roll it out and everything, it's fine. But that day, dude, you know how they like push you last rep on the hack squat, I'm like coming up and I just felt like I just felt this like pain go through my entire head. I don't know if it was like an exertion headache or what it was, but man, it freaking put me down for 4 to 5 days. And I came home and even when I got back home, I was like just doing like a deloadish style workout and I was just pushed it maybe a little too hard and I felt it and it re-aggravated it. So I was dealing with that for a couple of weeks. I guess just getting old. I don't know, but yeah, that was not fun. I don't know if it was an exertion headache. I don't really know what it was there with that, but yeah, N1 was super cool and took a ton of practical applications there with that. And then from a training perspective, still just in my building phase, I'm just slowly adding a little bit of weight. I'm trying to stay on the leaner side. I think we talked a couple months ago, like I'm making sure I do some dedicated cardio training. So I feel like that has allowed me to like it's increased my energy expenditure a little bit, I feel like. So it's helped me stay a little bit leaner in this building phase. But again, I'm not doing it for that reason, obviously, but it has helped me there with that. And otherwise, just staying consistent with training, man. I know you guys are probably the same way. Training just is an anchor to my day. And it's just fun to go in and like, there's days where I don't want to train and I feel unmotivated to train, but if I don't train, I know I'm going to feel way worse. And it's just nice to go in and try to progress. And you get that sense of accomplishment that just carries into everything else. And so that's just where I'm at with training, just trying to build right now. No plans for like cutting or anything. It probably won't be till, I don't know when my next cut will be honestly at this point. We'll see how everything goes with the baby and stuff like that. So that's where I'm at right now.
Congratulations, man. I think I texted you or DM'd you, but I don't know if I've ever formally told you, but congratulations. I'm stoked for you and Allie. You're going to be a great dad, dude. I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, that's the plan. Have them training right away.
Is Allie taller than you?
You're taller no, she's not taller. She's not taller than me. She's a little bit shorter. So that's the thing. It's a boy. It's a boy. Okay. There's a good chance.
I'm just messing with you, man.
Hey, there's a good chance he's going to be short though. So
he's going to have some massive quads though.
This dude's quads are so thick. I remember like one of your first rounds of progress pictures you sent me. I was like, God damn, dude. It's like tree trunks.
And I still barely train my legs. And it's just, you guys know there's just certain body parts that, man, are just super responsive. So luckily for me, it's my legs and I can train a little bit more upper body, which is what I enjoy anyway. So
I'm definitely not that way. Brandon, I don't think either of us are blessed with that. Dude, I feel like my legs are
Jeremiah, you and I are giants.
Legs are by far the thing I've had to work the hardest on.
I will say the only time being short has helped me out in any situation has been with like building muscle, right? Because I feel it shows up a little bit easier when you're short, right? When you're tall, you have to work, I feel like a little bit extra for that. So that is the one thing that I'm thankful for there with that. But sports, everything else, it puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage there, but what can you do? Cool, boys, you guys ready to answer a couple questions?
Yeah, let's get into it.
We need to do this one that we have been holding off for the last 4 roundtables. So it's differences in training and nutrition between bodybuilders and lifestyle clients.
I'll take it over, guys. So I'm actually excited to answer this because it's a really interesting topic for me because when I first started coaching, and this is all the way going back to 2013, the majority of my roster was made up of physique clients. And this is something I alluded to earlier in the podcast. And the minority of my roster at that time were lifestyle clients. And now it's actually done like a complete swap. So nowadays, the majority of my roster is made up of lifestyle clients or mostly fitness professionals as well. And now a much smaller percentage of my roster are physique competitors, but I still do work with them. So although I work with clients of all different backgrounds, the type of clients who have gravitated towards me has changed over the years. But obviously, if you develop a skill set, a certain type of clientele, you still have that knowledge and that practical application. But I think that this has really shaped how I approach this, because I've been all over the gambit in terms of the actual types of clients that I work with and who I really coach and what type of methodologies I take. But when it comes to how I approach training, nutrition, programming with my physique competitors as compared to my lifestyle clients, this really comes down to the differences in their experience levels, their goals, and their lifestyles. So, for example, the physique competitors I work with currently are all advanced trainees who have been training for a good amount of time. So most of them have been, we're talking 6 to 10 years of actual training experience. They've all done at least one contest prep before, but most of the competitors I work with currently are either experienced local level competitors or even on that regional level. And so really what I'm doing and my goal in working with them and why they've come to me is I'm trying to take them from a regional level to the next level, which is the national and pro qualifier level. So in totality, they're all individuals that are well experienced. They've been training and dieting for years, and they're quite proficient at training in a progressive manner and tracking their dietary intake and being accurate and consistent when doing so. And when it comes to how competitors approach their physique goals, it's usually a bit different than lifestyle clients, because the goals, the timelines, and the demands of competing in a sport like bodybuilding raises everything to the next level. And so I see this as like levels of, essentially, it's just a different, like shifting a post essentially. And I can tell you from my own experience, like I competed 15 times over the years. And I'll tell you that much of the success I've had in life, whether that be in my coaching career or mentoring, or even in my previous corporate career within the sports nutrition industry, is a direct result of the qualities and characteristics I developed through my contest preps. As prepping for a show challenges you physically and mentally in ways that only those who have competed. So, Jeff, I know you've done this yourself, and Jeremiah, you've gotten very close to competition shape. Unless you've actually pushed your body to that level and actually been in very lean condition, and you won't be able to essentially relate to it, because it requires you essentially to develop a greater level of discipline, drive, intrinsic motivation, and an ability to execute upon like the habits, the behaviors, and the actions needed to move you forward, even on the many days that you feel depleted, you feel like shit, you're drained, and you don't feel like doing your cardio, your training, and you're dieting on low calories. But you know that these actions are needed to get you ready for that show date, because regardless of how you feel, that date is going to come up and you need to get on that stage. And competing in physique sport helped me to not only improve my physique, but also like my mental fortitude and work ethic as well. And this is because competing in physique sport requires that you maintain a really structured and consistent daily routine to be able to check all the boxes needed to drive your physique forward on a daily basis, including your training, your meals, your cardio, your steps, your posing, on top of all your other like personal and professional responsibilities. Life does not stop because you're in a contest prep, but you need to learn how to manage all of those. And you need to be able to adhere to your plan to the utmost of your ability, because unlike in a fat loss phase where with a lifestyle client, you don't have a clear cut deadline. A lot of times when I go into a fat loss phase with lifestyle clients, it's listen, we're trying to get you to your goal, but if there's interruptions or there's obstacles along the way, or you have a vacation, I can put you into a diet breaker, what I refer to as a deficit deload. Like there are abbreviations or adjustments that can be made a lot more of a forgiving manner for a lifestyle client as compared to a competitor, because if you sign up for a show, it doesn't matter if you're ready or not. That show is still going on, so you need to be able to follow through on a daily basis to meet your timeline and the specific deadline for your goal. So really when it comes to the differences in nutrition and training for bodybuilders and lifestyle clients, I think of this more as a sliding scale between consistency, structure, adherence, and flexibility, where if someone is engaging in physique sport to be competitive, it necessitates turning up all those dials on consistency, structure, adherence, and turning down the dial of flexibility. So, for example, from a nutritional perspective, the same primary principles apply in terms of the hierarchy of importance for nutrition. So, adherence and consistency are still the most important aspect of your diet, whether you're a competitor or a lifestyle client. But for competitors, we need to be even more adherent and consistent on a daily basis. So, with physique competitors, it's essential that you nail your intake on a daily basis, as competing is a time sensitive goal. So if you fall off your diet for even a few days or a week, it will hinder your ability to get on stage in show shape on that day. With a lifestyle client, I often try to get them to be at least 90% consistent adherent to a plan when they're in a fat loss phase. But honestly, for physique competitors, when you're really trying to get to that next level, 90% might not be sufficient enough to actually attain your goals and to win your show or qualify for nationals or get a pro card. I've worked with many pro level competitors where 90% isn't cutting it. And I understand that sounds drastic or that sounds rough, but this is the reality of the sport. So I'll tell you guys, like personally, when I was competing, I never, and this is like my personality, but I never missed a single day of tracking or nailing my dietary intake. I always nailed my supplementation. I was in the gym doing my cardio every single day. It didn't matter how I felt, what was going on in life. This was a top priority for me. And I also have to put the caveat in there that I'm really objective with myself. And I knew at that time, especially the reason why I was so regimented and so locked in was I didn't have the genetics to truly hang with more genetically blessed competitors. So I knew that I didn't have it from a muscularity standpoint. So I needed to do my best within my ability to get shredded because that was stage conditioning was my calling card and my strong suit. So every day during prep, I woke up knowing that I had to be 100% on in terms of my actions, my habits, my behaviors, or I was not going to be able to be competitive. Now, when it comes to the nutritional differences between competitors and lifestyle clients, one of the biggest differences I actually see are in protein intakes when dieting, which is funny because this is something we just spoke about before. What's interesting about protein intake is that when we look at the most cited research on protein intake, we see the intakes of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram maximizes muscle growth, which is from the commonly cited meta-analysis by Morton and colleagues. But there are benefits of going beyond that when you're in a hypercaloric state, as it's been shown to help with reducing cravings and better regulating appetite and managing hunger in an extreme dieting phase. So if you actually go back and you look at Eric Helm, his master's research, he actually did, it was mostly on bodybuilding competitors and very lean athletes. And he did a randomized control trial where he used a moderate protein diet of 1.6 grams per kilogram per day. So that normal target that a lot of people cite. And they actually compared it against a higher protein diet of 2.8 grams per day in resistant training athletes looking to lose body fat. And he found that the higher protein intake, so that 2.8 grams per kilogram per day, led to greater diet satisfaction and satiation and lower stress levels in athletes who employed it. And they also reported lower fatigue levels. Then if we actually look into like the bodybuilding case study research, there's an immense amount of work that was done by a researcher who's actually a pro bodybuilder in and of himself named Dr. Andrew Chappell. And he's done really interesting research, which is observational, but he looks at the dietary habits of the most successful elite natural bodybuilders. And he found that one of the most commonly reported strategies is that those competitors who got the leanness and maintained their muscle the best and also won their competitions ate an average of 3.2 grams per kilogram of protein per day. So this is just another example of how higher protein intakes not only help with body composition, but also help with hunger management, and which can ultimately lead to better fat loss outcomes. So although most of the clients I work with nowadays are not competitors, they do have the goal of maximizing muscle growth and retention and maximizing body fat loss. And I think we need to keep in mind that success leaves clues, and bodybuilders, without a doubt, are the best at attaining the goal of losing body fat and maximizing muscle retention. And if we actually look at their contest prep habits and the things and the principles that they utilize to be successful, a lot of times they're going beyond that typical 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram per day. So I'll tell you personally, like I mentioned previously, I utilize higher protein diets with myself and many of my clients. And that's just something that I've seen really work well, especially for someone that struggles with appetite management. But also, I have a lot of clients that actually prefer higher protein intake. So I'm not going to cap them at 1.6 to 2.2 grams per day just because in the literature, that's what's said to maximize muscle growth in a eucaloric state, meaning at energy balance or in a surplus. So I manipulate things in terms of my approaches, my methodology, and the principles that I use. But really, when it comes down to it, the difference between lifestyle clients and then competitors is just the degree at which we hold the standards to them, as well as how important truly executing and being spot on is. I don't want to make this seem like it's black or white, or it's you pass or fail, or it's either bullseye or bust. But there's a lot more at stake when you're actually a physique competitor. And especially I've worked with professionals, like this is a component of their income, of their reputation, of their career and their profession. And in those circumstances, when someone has a sponsorship on the line or they have money that they're competing for, it raises the bar for everything that we do from a consistency and adherence and then a total execution perspective.
Yeah, no, I like what you said there, because I think sometimes people think that like bodybuilders do this like special thing to get like super lean, or like during contest prep, they do something special. But like you mentioned, it's like the principles are still there. Like they're still going to do the same things. They're still going to get into a calorie deficit to drop body fat. They're still going to train to maintain their lean body mass. And I think people think they have to do some special like sort of training, but really what it comes down to is, like you said, you just have a little bit more at stake, and you have to be a little bit more optimal with everything if you're trying to get a certain look and you're trying to be the top of the top. And I'm sure, Brandon, you've probably had top conversations with some of your clients that in the past when they used to compete, where they're like, oh, I want to get my pro card, I want to place super high, but then it's like in their head that's what they want, and then you actually push them to do it, and then you find out if they actually want to do that or not, right? Like they may think that they want to do it. It's a little bit different when they actually have to go through everything there. But real quick, what I wanted to say is, I think sometimes people think that they like during contest prep, like bodybuilders do some like special type of training. Like it's, oh, hey, they're in their off season, they weight train, and then bodybuilding competition comes around and now it's, oh, they're doing some special hit training or some sort of training like that. And again, I think the principles still apply, but like you said, you just have to hold them to a higher standard. And there obviously is probably going to be a little bit more time commitment to everything as well too during this process. One last thing I want to say though, real quick, is I also think that, and you mentioned, because you have to maintain a certain physique and stuff like that, and you have to basically do what it takes in sports, essentially. And there might just be a little bit less focus on health. Because like you mentioned, like you said, hey, I have to, like, there's days when I was super depleted, but I still needed to go through and like train, and I still needed to maintain my calorie deficit, where I feel like with a lifestyle client, you might listen to that biofeedback and potentially give a refeed or go closer to maintenance. Whereas like when you're trying to compete like this, like you have to push through that, and it might not be the greatest for your overall health for that period of time. Now, again, you're still going to do things. If you have a good coach, you're still going to try to do things to maximize your health and make sure it's in a good spot. But overall, Brandon, I'm sure you could say this, as you get super shredded, you get ready for a bodybuilding competition, your overall health does take a back seat a little bit, right? Like it's going to suffer at least a little bit, right? Hormonal production, everything like that as well too. And I think that's true for any sport, right? Like any professional athlete, you may see them as being super healthy, and generally they take care of themselves. But let's be honest, playing football or something like that's not the best for your body, and that's not the most healthy thing either. But you're willing to take that risk because you want to get to a certain level there with that.
100%. There's actually two things I want to expand upon. So first, the health aspect. Yes, when you are competing, whether that be natural or enhanced, there are sacrifices that are involved in the process to get you to your ultimate potential, and then also to get into a condition that it's not healthy. You are going to essential levels of body fat that no one can or should maintain. So for instance, if we look at the benefits from a fat loss perspective, if you look at the average general population client, we're going to see that fat loss. So the process of losing fat is going to lower inflammatory levels, because body fat is an inherently fatty tissue first and foremost, but it also releases inflammatory cytokines. We're going to see improvements in cholesterol values, so your blood lipids. You're going to see increase in insulin sensitivity and better blood glucose management. We're going to see things like, actually, if you're weight and you have excess adiposity, losing body fat, actually there's a systematic review on this, which shows that people that have higher body fat levels, when they actually go into a deficit and they lose body fat, it improves not only their testosterone, their total testosterone values, but their free testosterone values. And that's because fat tissue has an enzyme called aromatase, which is where testosterone is converted into estradiol. So more of your testosterone is getting converted into estrogen when you have excessive body fat levels. However, if we go to a more severe degree, so you are below, say, I'm talking an actual 8% of body fat. Once we get down to the 8, 7, 6, 5% of body fat, a lot of the bodybuilding case studies, they get between 5 to 6% of body fat at natural levels. Now we're seeing enormous decrements in testosterone production. So now, instead of actually seeing increases in testosterone, we see decreases in testosterone. We see thyroid hormone starts getting downregulated. So not only do we see an issue in the conversion, so the conversion of T4 to metabolically active T3, but we also see total T4 and total T3 levels go down as a whole. So now you have a downturning of your metabolic rate. We see that leptin levels, which is our main appetite hormone or satiety hormone, is decreasing. We see that ghrelin goes through the roof, so our hunger signaling is thrown off. There's so many metabolic adaptations that occur from being at that low of a level of body fat. So yes, there are some health decrements to that process. Now I will say, and this, I'm just going to take this from my perspective, I do see training being a little bit different. And I'll allude to this, or I'll expand upon this. So yes, from a fundamental perspective, Jeff, you're 100% right. The same fundamental principles apply for both competitors and lifestyle clients, as it's not like the mechanism of muscle growth change just because someone is stepping on stage. But I do think that the largest difference in training physique competitors as compared to lifestyle clients is how specific the training program design needs to be in terms of targeting specific muscle groups, which are important for the class that they're competing in. So I'll tell you personally, like when I used to have competitors come to me, and I still do, I need to align their training specialization or their training program design based on the judge's feedback. So I need to look at their current body composition and level of development. I need to analyze their photos, and then I have to go back to the judge's criteria or their feedback. Whereas with a lifestyle client, I'm going to consider their physique goals, like what they want to achieve, first and foremost over everything else. So I could do a needs analysis of what I think that their body would need to have an improvement on a global level. But if I have someone come to me and say, listen, Jeff, you're a great example. Listen, I'm not interested in global development. My legs are very well developed. I don't want to train them at the same level as I do, say, my delts and back. we can utilize a specialization cycle for that. However, I have often had to use more specialization cycles with competitors and utilize them more frequently and design them in a manner that is more suited to the class that we're actually putting them in and they're competing in than what they actually desire. So I can actually give you guys a perfect example of this because I had to do this very specifically with one of my clients that both of you guys know, which was IFBB Pro Anthony Scalzo. So when we did our first pro season together, that was back in 2020. So he did 2 shows, 2 pro shows, and the feedback that we got was that he needed more back and chest development. So at first, I transitioned him into a back specialization cycle, followed by a chest specialization cycle. And I actually had to decrease and drastically decrease his delt training because his delts, you guys know this very well because you guys have seen him, he's delt dominant, but this was a body part he really liked to train and was one that looked great on his physique, but it was actually taking away, especially from his chest development and actually how his chest looked on stage. We were lucky in the fact that his back blew up during his first specialization cycle. So we did a couple back-to-back mesocycles of back specialization work, but then for his next competitive season, which was the fall of 2020, we actually spent the whole previous year prior to that just focusing on chest and bicep specialization work. Whereas things change, there's a gradient. So with lifestyle clients, or I have a perfect example of this. I have a client currently that was an IFBB figure pro. Her name's Carlin. So shout out to her because I'm actually prepping her for her 40th birthday. That's this weekend. And now she's decided just recently that she wants to step away from the stage. So when she first came to me, she had intentions of getting back on stage. So there was a very heavy development because she was in the figure class that we needed to work on her delt and her lat development, which we did for the first year that we were working together because having the X frame and like her taper was a massive component of that category. However, she's changed careers over the last years. Her 40th birthday is coming up. And right now, really she's also started a business. So really that's become much more of a priority. So she's decided within the last couple of months that she wants to transition out of competing. So the last few months, we've actually been working on a fat loss phase for getting her ready for her 40th birthday. But I've actually specifically taken away the emphasis from her delts and lats, and I've actually reduced volume drastically on them to specifically detrain them because she's actually wanted to bring down her upper body, and we've tried to bring up her lower body. So we've been doing a glute and quadricep specialization cycle so that she has like a curvier lower body, but a less dramatic and drastic V taper up top. If she was still competing, we would not be able to do that. So really, when it comes down to it, with lifestyle clients, this is actually an advantage. We can do and align things more in a fashion of what you want from your physique. Whereas if you're competing, you have to realize that there is a classification and there are categories as well as there are certain requirements of each category that you look into competing in. And if a judge tells you, listen, you need to work on these muscle groups, if you come back next year in that same stage and you haven't worked on those and you decided to just do your own thing and decide that you just want to pursue the type of body part specialization cycle that you want, you may not fare that. So you really have to think about it as the fact you have, as a competitor, and I know this personally, you have less autonomy over your own physique because it's being judged by an external panel. Whereas with lifestyle clients, it's listen, what do you want to work on? The first thing I always ask clients, what are you passionate about? What are your goals? What do you want to work on? What is the physique in your mind? What is your vision? If you don't want large delts, and I think that looks great on someone, that's fine. We can train them at a minimal level. And really, the amount of volume that's needed to either maintain or just the minimum effective dose essentially for a body part is pretty low. So we can do minimal work on the body parts that you really don't have focus or desire to develop. And we can place much more of an emphasis on the body parts you do. Whereas with a competitor, it's like, we're going to box and we got to stay there until you decide either to transition out or if you decide that you want to transition into either another league or to another category.
Real quick. No, that makes a ton of sense. Basically, like what you're saying is like for people that are competing in a bodybuilding show, like you have to take into consideration what the judges are looking at because you're trying to win, right? So you have to bring up certain points. Whereas like lifestyle, it's, hey, you can, whatever you want to bring up, that's what we're going to work on. I think there though, that's still like hypertrophy training. I think what I was like trying to get at too, and maybe you understood this. I just want to make sure. I think some people think that like on the outside, people that are maybe more lifestyle clients or they don't really know what goes into bodybuilding training, or I think they think that like when people are in prep, they do some like special type of training where they do like more hit style workouts or they do boot camp style, like stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's what I was trying to get at there with that, where it's like, they don't do any like special training. It's still weight training, hypertrophy style training, right? I don't know. Have you seen that or anything like that before where like people think that, or like they think they do some sort of special type of style training or like more intense or something, you know what I mean? Like a boot camp style, basically.
So I didn't take that from when you first alluded to that, but I do understand what you're talking about sometimes. And this is something I actually do get questions about from individuals that are lifestyle clients, but they're almost like hobby builders. That's how I categorize them, meaning that they're interested in bodybuilding and potentially may want to step on a stage in the future. So for instance, right before this call, I was talking to Patty, which is a client of mine that Jeremiah, I know you know her. And
Yeah,
she
that's
has an interest in potentially competing at some point in the future. But I'm training her like in a mix between a lifestyle client and physique competitor. She's a hobby builder essentially. She is someone serious about her physique development, but she isn't stepping on stage. So we're working towards overall physique progression. Really, that comes down to body recomposition, increasing lean body mass and decreasing fat mass. That is the goal that most people have. And so if you are someone that is intentionally training for the goal of improving your lean mass to fat mass ratio, you're a bodybuilder, whether you want to categorize yourself as that or not. The mechanism of hypertrophy, engaging in high levels of mechanical or ensuring high levels of mechanical tension, training in a progressive manner, getting sufficiently close to failure, within a close proximity to failure, utilizing a sufficient amount of volume for your needs and demands. Those principles all still apply. And I do know that some clients have come to me and wanted to know if they could be on a bodybuilding program, which is the same thing as a hypertrophy program. And sometimes they do think, and they're under this false guise that there's like these philosophies or strategies where you can burn in the cuts or you do high rep work to really get defined. And they think about this it's almost like the mythology work. And this was something that was very common, say in the early 2000s, where a lot of individuals used to claim that rep ranges would elicit different changes in muscle structure, first and foremost, like the definition, you would get more defined or more striations in a muscle if you did higher rep ranges, and you get denser, harder muscle if you utilize lower rep ranges. Or they thought about fiber type specific hypertrophy. So higher rep ranges would elicit more slow twitch fiber adaptations, and lower rep ranges would elicit more high threshold motor unit activation as well as fast twitch fiber activation. We really see in the literature that doesn't play out for the most part. And there's still some. I know Brad Schoenfeld has some research that has looked at specifically like in the cast, if high reps or low reps, do they specifically target type 1 or type 2 muscle fibers? We don't see that to be the case at this point. And there may be some data that comes out later on down the road that it does specifically target, but this would probably be very specific types of training protocols. These are generally extreme. It's almost like when you actually look into the stretch mediated hypertrophy protocols, it's like an hour of intense static stretching a day, 7 days a week. Like a lot of things, these aren't what are called ecologically valid, meaning we wouldn't apply them in the real world, but there aren't different training philosophies. It's the same principles that apply to both a lifestyle client and a competitor. However, the application of those things with a competitor, generally we will utilize higher volume training. They will have a higher work volume. We will utilize probably more cardio than someone that's lifestyle client because we're trying to increase energy expenditure. The best way to put this is principles are few, but methods are many. And so we'll utilize those same principles and we'll just manipulate them for the client population that we're working with to maximize the results that we're trying to aim towards. But it's not like a lifestyle client. I had them doing a very specific type of training in terms of this is only hypertrophy training, but this isn't bodybuilding training. And then my bodybuilders, it's like, oh, I'm burning in the cuts, doing high rep drop sets and all these intensity techniques and all these things. That's a fallacy to say the least.
Jeremiah, did you have anything? I know didn't you recently coach somebody as well too that competed, or at least somebody on your team did?
Andrea had a girl go WA, win her pro card in December, actually, but that's like the first competitor we've ever coached. And that's what we won't work with a lot of competitors, of course. But no, I don't know if I really have too much to add. I think that we work with a lot of people who have come from working with a bodybuilding coach previously because they see like the bodybuilding coaches athletes and it's damn, I want to look like that. And I think that again, there's good coaches and bad coaches everywhere. I think that a lot of times, I think there's the difference in how you coach someone, I think is oftentimes there's a lot more of an emotional component rather than just, hey, we just do the work. And I feel like there's just like being willing to, as you said, what's this person's trade-offs? What are they willing to make? And I think of a client I posted the other day where we've been working together for 5 years and the entire time, like he hasn't wanted to go past tracking just his calories and protein, never from training more than 3 days a week, and it's all good. That's fine. We can still make great progress like that. But he understands the trade-offs he's making. So I don't think I really have too much to add past what you guys have already mentioned there.
Yeah, I think a big thing about that is with competitors, and this is a conversation I often have. I will tell you, and I don't want to talk down upon bodybuilding. I wasn't disgruntled with my experience with bodybuilding. I had a great competitive career or whatever you want to call it. I did 15 shows. Really why I stepped away from the stages, I got to a point in my career where I realized that I was either going to, because I prepped myself, so I was either going to focus on my physique pursuits on the stage, or I was going to focus on my athletes. And at that time, I had someone at the Olympia level. And I'll never forget this story. I went to go see him in person at the Olympia, which is the biggest stage in bodybuilding. And actually, I'll be honest with you guys, I cried out in the stage. I had seen this guy's journey and I had known him for so many years. He was a very close friend of mine. And I realized, that I didn't have the potential, but to do that, first and foremost, I didn't have the potential to go pro. I was I think the best I did was fifth at nationals in a competition. I had won some local shows or regional shows, but it wasn't something that was, first and foremost, it wasn't adding to my career, nor was it something that was really going to be something that I could really go a long term with. And I realized I was in a fork in the road, and essentially I could either go the route where this is 2018. And so had a fork in the road essentially where I could either really go all in on coaching and coaching others and really trying to have an impact on them, or I could focus more on myself and be selfish in that process. Because process prep is extremely selfish. You have to prioritize everything that needs to be done before everything else. And so I had a fork in the road, and I decided to go the coaching route and really go all in on my athletes and on my competitors, as well as the lifestyle clients that I started taking on. And the biggest thing within that is that there needs to be informed consent. And this goes with any client that you're working with. If someone has unrealistic goals or expectations, or they have really high standards, and you realize that their execution or their actions are not at the level that are needed to get them to their goal, you have to sit down and have that conversation with them. I just had this with a lifestyle client of mine earlier today. She has very high expectations, and she wants to get back to a physique that she was at 5-6 years ago, doing very different things. Her lifestyle was much different. She was training 6 days a week. She now trains 3 to 4 days per week. She was doing cardio every single day. She was coached by a bodybuilding coach. And she came to me looking for a more sustainable approach to physique development. But also now she mentions in her check-ins that she wants to be right back where she was. And what you do needs to reflect, or essentially your goals need to reflect what you're willing to do. And so we really have to have these conversations and informed consent. And anytime that someone comes to me for contest prep, I'm going to be honest with you guys, especially with women, I end up talking more women out of competing than I do talking them into competing. And I know at times that has lost me clients, but I'll give you a perfect example. The competitor that I just referenced, Carlin, before, she came to me after about a 16-month prep. She had done multiple pro shows. She came to me and she needed health restoration, essentially. She was going through a lot of adrenal dysfunction, essentially adrenal insufficiency, dealing with a ton of health issues. And when she first came to me, it was really with the intention of me helping her fix her and to get her health back on line and essentially restore her hormones. And then she wanted to go right back into a prep. And when we got to a place where she was in a better place physiologically, I always say a healthy body is a responsive body. Her body was starting to respond. She was firing on all cylinders. She approached me about going right into a prep. And I told her, listen, this is not conducive for your long-term health. I've seen how long it's taken to get you back to a healthy state. And these are the side effects that you're going to experience if you go back there. We've done all this work to try to undo, I don't want to put it in the wrong way, but essentially it was damage that was done by her previous coach. And so we did all this work to be able to rectify the mistakes of the past. And I didn't want her to go right back into that position. So we have not died. We've been working together well over a year and a half. This is the first dieting phase we've ever had. And I made a post about her yesterday on my story, and she actually reposted it. And she had gotten emotional with an email that I sent her because I was incredibly proud of her. But this is the first time that she's dieted in her adult life where she's been able to get to a great physique. She's not contest lean. She's not at the same level that she was, but she's gotten into a very healthy lifestyle lean condition, and she hasn't sacrificed her health and had to utilize certain strategies and extreme methods to be able to get there. And that's a hell of an accomplishment, because that not only shows physique progress and physical progress, but mental progress, because oftentimes we get so caught up in the physique that we had previously. And I'll tell you, that's why I'm going to get shredded this summer. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to get into photo shoot shape, but I always remind myself, I am not competing again. I'm not going to make the sacrifices necessary to get to where I was previously. And that is something that we all have to remind ourselves about. For every give me, there's a gotcha. And that goes especially in physique pursuits. So this is where you have to go to a coach that knows both ends of the spectrum. And I think that this question was perfect from our audience, because this is something that I've been deeply, heavily entrenched in. The first 5 years of my career, 2013 to 2018, the vast majority, I'd say 70% of my roster were all competitors. And now I'm at the point where it's more than 80% lifestyle clients, and I'm very heavily invested into that genre. And I've been able to work with both and see both ends of the spectrum. And you have to go to someone that understands where you're coming from, is willing to meet you where you're at, and then guide you through the process in the healthiest manner possible, realizing that in some pursuits, they're less healthy than others. So in a physique pursuit like bodybuilding, it's a lot less healthy. There are health decrements, but you have to, if you're going to go to that level, first of all, you have to have informed consent. So the professional you're working with needs to give you a heads up about that, first and foremost. And second of all, you need to work with a fitness professional, a nutritional and training professional that is able to not only bring you there and get you to that condition, but also get you out of it.
Yep. No, absolutely. I love that. Like setting that expectation and talking to them. And again, you can also get in great shape and look lean without having to do a show if you don't want to as well too. That is also an option. Boys, I know we are here at half past 30 minutes after, whatever you want to say. So I know we need to wrap it up. Record, I think we only got through one. That might have tied our record for least amount of questions we've gotten through, but that's what happens.
We got to do these more often.
I was going to say that's what happens. That's what happens when we don't talk for 3 months. So it was good catching up with you guys. I don't know if there's anything you guys want to let the audience know about either way before we end the call today.
I think I'm good. Always great to catch up with you guys.
Yeah, always a pleasure. And this just means because we only got through one, we have a bunch of other questions. Let's do this more often, guys.
Yep, absolutely. We got them in the queue, so we'll save them for next time. So cool, guys. All right, we'll talk to you soon.
See you guys.